He pointed without saying a word. Moments later, the police dog found something that silenced everyone. It began on an unusually quiet afternoon, the kind of silence that feels wrong, heavy, almost deliberate. The sun was bright, yet the air carried an unspoken tension, as if something dark hid behind the calm. In the middle of that stillness stood a little boy, barefoot, dusty, and trembling, staring at a police patrol car parked near the edge of an old dirt road. His eyes didn't blink, and his lips didn't move. But what he did next would shake an entire town to its core. The boy didn't speak a single word. Instead, he slowly lifted his small hand, pointing toward a cluster of trees just beyond the road. His motion was hesitant yet precise, a silent signal meant for someone who could understand more than words. And that someone was not a person. It was a police dog, a well-trained German shepherd named Rex. At first, the officers thought the boy was just lost. But Rex didn't. The dog's ears twitched, his muscles tensed, and within seconds, he began to pull forward, nose low, tail stiff. Something was wrong. Something was there. Before we uncover what Rex found hidden in those woods, take a moment to tell us, from which beautiful country are you watching this story? Red Heart. If you love your country, tap that like button, share this video, and comment your country's name below. Let's see which country's viewers stand strongest in kindness and courage today. Now, back to our story. The boy's name was Malik. Barely 7 years old, yet his face carried the kind of fear no child should ever know. His clothes were torn, and his small hands shook as he tried to keep his balance on the uneven road. He didn't say a word, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Something had stolen his voice, maybe for a few hours, maybe forever. The officers followed Rex as the dog began to move faster, pulling them deeper toward the trees. The air grew colder there. The sunlight faded beneath the thick canopy. And though the forest looked ordinary from afar, it hid an unsettling stillness, the kind that warns of something alive, something waiting. Rex sniffed the ground, then suddenly froze. A low growl rumbled from his throat. His handler knew that sound. It wasn't alert, it was warning. There was danger ahead. The officer looked back at Malik, who still stood silently near the roadside. The boy's wide eyes followed the dog's every move. It was as if he already knew what Rex was about to find, and didn't want to see it again. A few minutes later, the dog led the team to an old shed covered in vines and rusted metal sheets. The door hung loose, half broken, half forced shut. The smell of decay hung in the air, something rotten, yet faintly human. The officers' steps grew slower, their breathing heavier. And there, in that moment, the world seemed to pause. The boy on the road had stopped breathing, his small chest trembling. His eyes filled with tears as if memory itself had become too heavy to hold. Something had happened in that shed. Something he had witnessed, or barely escaped. The officers approached carefully. The door creaked open, each sound cutting through the stillness like a blade. Rex barked once, sharp, urgent, and then went silent again, staring at something inside. And that's when the first officer saw it. A torn piece of cloth. A rope. And beside it, something that looked disturbingly like a shoe, too small for an adult. It was enough to make even a veteran officer step back. The shed's darkness seemed to breathe. Every shadow looked alive. The smell of fear and damp would mixed into something unforgettable. Whatever was hidden there had been there for a while, long enough to leave behind traces of pain, but not long enough to be forgotten. Outside, Malik stood motionless. But deep in his eyes, you could see the truth, a memory replaying over and over again. He wasn't just pointing to danger. He was pointing to his past. Rex barked again, this time moving toward the back of the shed. The officers followed, flashlights cutting through the gloom. And then, a soft noise, barely audible. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something human. Faint breathing. Someone was alive. The officers froze. One motioned for silence, while Rex pawed at the ground near a pile of wooden planks. They moved them aside, one by one, until a pale hand appeared beneath the debris. It was shaking. Weak. but alive. A young woman lay there, bound by ropes, her face covered in dirt and dried tears. She blinked, struggling to open her eyes, and then collapsed into the officer's arms as Rex barked wildly for help. The radio crackled. Backup was called. Paramedics were on their way. But while the team rushed to save the woman, Malik still hadn't moved. He just stood there, silent, staring at the shed. And that's when one of the officers noticed something strange. Malik's wrists, faint bruises, small cuts, like rope marks. His shoes missing. His shirt, torn in a way that didn't look accidental. He hadn't just found the crime. He had been part of it. The realization struck like lightning. The woman inside wasn't the only victim. Malik had been there, too, trapped, scared, watching something no child should ever see. And somehow, he had escaped, or been let go. But why? As the officers tried to talk to him, Malik turned his gaze away and began to back up slowly. His eyes darted to the trees. The forest seemed to breathe. Each rustle of leaves, each faint crack beneath a distant foot, felt alive, deliberate. The air carried the weight of something unseen, something that watched but didn't want to be found. The police officers froze in place, their flashlights cutting weak tunnels through the darkness. Rex stood firm at the edge of the tree line, growling low, his instincts burning with alarm. Malik hadn't moved an inch. He stood near the dirt road, staring toward the woods with wide, tear-filled eyes. The faint wind pushed against his torn shirt, but he didn't shiver. It was as if his body remembered fear too deeply to react anymore. His silence wasn't just the absence of words, it was the sound of something broken inside him. The officers tried calling his name, softly at first, then louder. But Malik didn't blink. His gaze remained locked on that dark stretch of forest, where the air seemed thicker, and the sunlight refused to enter. Something, or someone, was still out there. Minutes later, backup arrived. Ambulances, more patrol cars, yellow tape marking the area. The rescued woman was rushed away on a stretcher, whispering faint words the officers couldn't fully understand. But even in her half-conscious state, she kept pointing toward the woods, the same direction Malik had. Her trembling hand repeated the gesture until the doors of the ambulance closed. Inside the shed, investigators worked in silence. They found signs of a long stay, discarded food wrappers, ropes, an old lantern, and what looked like a child's drawing nailed to the wall. It was rough, drawn with crayons, but clear enough to chill anyone who saw it. 2 stick figures stood under a large tree, one tall, one small. Between them was a strange shape, almost like a dog. And behind them, drawn in red, was something that looked like eyes. Not one pair, but many. Malik had drawn it. Outside, the boy sat quietly on a step near the patrol car. A paramedic tried to check his pulse, but he flinched, pulling his hand away. His eyes darted toward the trees again, scanning, waiting. Somewhere deep inside him, he knew it wasn't over, that the evil he had escaped hadn't gone far. As night approached, the forest changed. The soft gold of afternoon turned to the deep gray of evening. Crickets began to hum, and the shadows melted together until the path ahead vanished completely. The officers decided to search one last time before dark. They formed a small unit, 2 with flashlights, 1 with a radio, and the handler with Rex leading the way. Malik stayed behind, wrapped in a blanket, still silent. Rex sniffed the air, muscles tense, tail straight. He led them past the shed, deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, scattered with broken branches and patches of mud. But then they saw it, footprints. Small ones? Bare feet. Could be Malik's, one officer murmured under his breath. But the size didn't match exactly. These were smaller, uneven, as if the person had been dragging one leg. They followed the tracks deeper, until the forest began to close in on them. The trees grew denser, their roots twisting like bones beneath the soil. And then Rex stopped again. He began circling one spot, barking fiercely. The sound echoed through the stillness, cutting through the night like a siren. The officers rushed closer, shining their flashlights at the ground, and saw something buried beneath the leaves. A box. Old, wooden, almost like a chest. Its lid was nailed shut. They pried it open. Inside lay children's clothes, neatly folded, some stained with dirt, others torn. Beneath them, a single photograph. It showed 3 children standing outside what looked like the same shed. One of them was Malik. The other 2, no one recognized. A chill swept through the officers. Whoever had done this hadn't just kept people locked away, they had kept memories. Trophies. Back at the roadside, Malik began to rock gently back and forth, as if sensing what the officers had found. His eyes glazed over with tears that never fell. Somewhere behind his silence lived a story too terrifying to tell. The officers radioed for further support, but the signal crackled weakly. The forest seemed to swallow their voices whole. And then, suddenly, the radio picked up a faint whisper. Not static. Not interference. A voice. Soft. Almost childlike. Don't make noise! The words came through once, broken, fading, and then gone. The handler looked at the device, eyes wide. The other officers froze. It couldn't have been Malik. He hadn't spoken a single word all day. But the voice, it sounded eerily like his. They turned back toward the road, and froze. Malik was no longer there. The blanket lay folded neatly on the step where he had been sitting. The patrol car door was still open. But the boy was gone. Rex barked wildly, pulling free from his leash, sprinting into the darkness. The officers followed, yelling his name, their flashlights slicing through the trees. The forest felt endless now, each direction the same, each step heavier. And then, through the shadows, a sound echoed, faint crying. A child's cry. But not from fear. From something deeper. From despair. They followed it, running, tripping over roots and fallen branches, until the sound stopped. Dead silence again. The flashlight beams caught something ahead, a figure standing beneath an enormous tree. Small. Barefoot. Still. It was Malik. But there was something different this time. He was holding something in his hands. Something metallic that glinted under the beam of light. The officers approached carefully, hearts pounding, and saw what it was. A locket. Covered in dirt. Old. He raised it slowly toward them, his eyes wide and lost. And then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse, trembling, the voice of a child who had seen too much. He said, "He'll come back tonight." And as his final word faded into the darkness, Rex began to bark furiously again, spinning toward the trees behind them. The forest came alive with noise, branches breaking, footsteps running, something moving fast. The officers turned their lights toward the sound, weapons drawn. But what they saw between the trees made their blood run cold. A tall shadow, thin, the night deepened into a kind of darkness that felt alive, as if the forest itself was breathing. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying fragments of broken sounds, footsteps, distant echoes, the faint rustle of something large moving slowly through the undergrowth. Every officer felt it now, this wasn't a normal search anymore. It was something else. Something that belonged to the night. Rex stood rigid, tail stiff, every muscle tense. His bark wasn't loud anymore, it was low, measured, cautious. His instincts screamed danger. The handler knelt, placing a hand on the dog's back, feeling the tremble beneath the fur. Whatever was out there, was close. Malik stood by the base of the large tree, clutching the old locket tightly in his hand. His face was pale under the flashlight beam, his eyes lost in a faraway stare. That small piece of metal, rusted, dented, and cold, seemed to mean something more than anyone could yet understand. The lead officer took a step toward him, speaking softly, trying not to startle him. But Malik wasn't looking at the officer. He was staring past him, into the darkness behind. And then he whispered again, barely audible. "He's here." The words sent a shiver through every person present. The air felt heavier suddenly, as if the forest had drawn a deep breath and refused to let it out. The flashlight beams darted in every direction, slicing through the mist, revealing only emptiness, until one caught something moving. A shape. Human. Faint. Watching. The handler shouted for backup, but the radio only gave static. The forest was a cage now, cutting them off from the world beyond. The shadows shifted again, closer this time. Rex lunged forward, barking ferociously, pulling against his leash with violent force. The handler could barely hold him. The sound echoed through the trees, each bark bouncing back like ghostly replies. Then silence. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet that follows before something breaks. The tall figure stepped out from behind the trees, barely visible except for the faint gleam of moonlight on its outline. A man, or something like one. His clothes hung in tatters, his face hidden beneath a hood, his hands long and thin. He stood there, motionless, watching. Malik gasped and stumbled backward, pressing his back against the tree. His breathing turned ragged. The officers moved closer around him, forming a protective circle, flashlights aimed. "Stop!" one of them shouted into the dark. The figure didn't move. Rex growled deeper, pulling again. His fur bristled, teeth bared. And then, the figure spoke. A low, almost whispered tone. "Leave the boy." That voice, hoarse, broken, like something dragged through years of smoke and pain. The officers shouted again, but before they could advance, the figure turned and ran, and possibly fast, deeper into the woods. Rex tore free from his handler's grip and bolted after him. The forest exploded with noise, barks, snapping branches, heavy footsteps crashing through mud. The handler followed, shouting the dog's name, but the darkness swallowed them both. The remaining officers stayed with Malik, who had fallen to his knees, shaking violently. He clutched the locket so tightly that blood trickled down his small fingers. One officer knelt beside him, gently prying it from his hand. When they opened it, their hearts froze. Inside were two tiny photographs, both children. A boy and a girl. The boy was Malik. The girl, no one recognized. On the opposite side of the locket's casing, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were words so faint they almost disappeared under the light. "Find us before he does." The forest swallowed more sounds, a distant bark, then silence again. The handler and Rex were gone. The team called out, voices echoing into the dark, but no response came back. One of the officers took Malik's hand, urging him toward the patrol car at the road's edge. But the boy resisted. His eyes were still locked on the woods. "He always comes back," he murmured under his breath, his voice shaking. "He finds us when it's dark." No one dared to ask what he meant. Hours later, the search for the handler and Rex continued under floodlights and drones. The area was cordoned off, but every camera feed showed the same eerie pattern, static interference, as if the forest itself refused to be seen. The shed was sealed. The surrounding woods scanned. But there was no trace of them, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Only silence. When dawn finally broke, the first rays of sunlight painted the trees gold again, yet nothing felt bright. The town awoke to the news of a missing officer, a police dog, and a mysterious child survivor who had appeared out of nowhere. Malik was taken into temporary custody, safe, but silent again. He refused to speak another word, staring out the window of the care unit where they kept him. Nurses came and went. Food was left untouched. The only thing he held on to was that locket, which he refused to let anyone take again. That night, something strange happened in the police station. One of the surveillance screens, the one pointed toward the forest's perimeter, flickered on by itself. The feed was dark, foggy, but faintly visible. A man was standing there again, at the same spot where the handler and Rex had vanished. Behind him, barely visible, something moved in the shadows. A shape, large, low to the ground. Then, a sound came through the monitor's weak speakers. A growl. Familiar. Rex. The man turned slowly toward the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. His face came into focus, pale, hollow-eyed, expressionless. And in his hand, something hung by a strap. The handler's police badge. The screen went black. The officers rushed to the site immediately, but when they arrived, there was nothing. No man, no dog, no footprints. Only a single item resting on the dirt where the man had stood, a child's drawing. It showed the same two stick figures again, one tall, one small, standing beneath a tree. But now the dog was gone. The drawing was fresh. The crayon marks still soft to the touch. Back at the care unit, Malik woke up screaming for the first time. He pointed toward the window, trembling, his eyes wide with terror. The nurse rushed to calm him, but when she looked outside she saw it too, faintly illuminated by the moonlight, a tall shadow standing near the fence. Motionless. Watching. And in that moment Malik whispered the words that no one in that town would ever forget. "He said he'll take the rest of us next." The nurse froze. Because the sun never truly rose that morning. The sky turned gray, heavy with mist, as if the light itself refused to touch the town. The police station was restless, phones ringing, radios hissing, officers whispering in low, uncertain tones. Everyone was talking about the same thing: the figure caught on the surveillance footage, the missing officer, and the silent boy who seemed to know more than anyone dared to ask. Malik sat in a corner room of the local child protection unit, staring blankly at the floor. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't spoken. The only movement he made was the slow turning of the small silver locket in his hand, over and over again. The sound of it clicking faintly between his fingers echoed in the quiet room like a heartbeat. Outside, Detective Harper, the lead investigator, was reviewing the footage again. Each frame played like a ghost film, static, flicker, shadow. When the figure lifted the badge toward the camera, Harper paused the video, zooming in. Something about the man's hand caught her attention. It was burned. The skin looked twisted, scarred, as if melted by fire long ago. Her stomach sank. She knew that mark. Years ago, there had been a man in this very town, a caretaker at a now abandoned children's shelter. His name had long been erased from the system after a mysterious fire destroyed the place, taking several children with it. Only 2 had survived, both too young to testify. One of them had been sent away for adoption. The other had disappeared. Harper turned to the window of the observation room. Malik sat there, small and fragile, turning his locket. She knew now. He wasn't just another victim. He was the survivor. The fire had happened 8 years ago. Malik was 5 back then. The man, the one who called himself Uncle Ray, had promised the orphans food, stories, and safety. But behind those walls, he hid something monstrous. When the shelter burned down, people said it was an accident. But Harper had read the reports. The doors had been chained shut from the outside. Ray's body had never been found. And now, here he was again. Burned, twisted, alive, and watching. By afternoon, Harper decided to try one last time to reach Malik. She entered the room slowly, sitting across from him. Her voice was soft, careful. "You remember him, don't you?" she said. Malik didn't look up. "You saw him last night," Harper continued. "The man in the woods?" Still nothing. She leaned closer. "He can't hurt you now. You're safe here." And that was when Malik finally moved. His small hand reached for the table, and he placed the locket gently between them. He opened it, revealing the 2 faces inside. "She's still there," he whispered. It was the first full sentence he had spoken in days. His eyes met Harper's, trembling, desperate. He didn't let her go. Harper's heart sank. The girl in the picture, the other child, might still be alive. But where? Malik looked out the window again. "He keeps them where the fire never ends," he murmured softly. His words didn't make sense at first. But then, Harper remembered the site of the old shelter. It was still standing, blackened walls, charred trees, the smell of ash still lingering after all these years. Locals called it the burned hollow. That night, Harper assembled a team. They headed toward the outskirts of the forest, where the ground was scarred from the fire. Malik refused to stay behind. When Harper tried to stop him, he shook his head, tears streaming silently. "She'll be scared if I don't come," he whispered. They couldn't argue with that. The forest seemed different now, alive with whispering echoes and low moans that had no source. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened with smoke, even though there was no fire. And then, through the haze, they saw it, the remains of the old children's shelter. The structure was nothing more than bones now, walls half collapsed, windows shattered, the faint smell of burnt wood still clinging to the earth. But something about it felt wrong. The ash was fresh, as if it had burned again only last night. Harper's flashlight caught movement inside. A flicker. Then another. And then, something that shouldn't have been possible. Children. Dozens of them, standing in silence, facing the wall. Their figures were faint, outlines more than bodies, their skin pale, their clothes singed. The team froze. Malik walked past them, his face calm, almost peaceful. He stopped before one of the figures, a small girl with a red ribbon in her hair, and reached out his hand. The girl turned slowly. Her face was clean, unburned. Her eyes wide and sad. And then she smiled. "You came back," she whispered. Harper felt her body turn cold. The others began to back away, but Malik stepped closer, holding the locket between them. The girl reached for it. "He still watches us," she said. "He never left." Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through the air, a creak of wood, a door slamming somewhere deeper inside the ruins. The faint glow of fire began to flicker along the walls. The smell of smoke grew stronger. Harper yelled for everyone to get out, but the fire spread unnaturally fast, swallowing the air in thick orange light. Malik didn't move. He stood frozen as the girl stepped backward, fading into the flames. "Find us before he does," she said, her voice echoing the same words carved into the locket. Harper ran forward, grabbing Malik, pulling him out just as the roof caved in behind them. The team stumbled into the open field, coughing, gasping, the fire roaring higher, but then suddenly, it was gone. The flames vanished. The building was whole again, blackened, untouched by fire. But Malik was no longer in Harper's arms. She spun around, calling his name. Nothing. The other officers searched frantically, shouting into the mist. No footprints. No sound. No sign of him. Only the faint smell of smoke, and the sound of a child's laughter drifting through the trees. Harper dropped to her knees, staring at the ashes that weren't burning. Her hands shook as she looked toward the horizon, where the first stars began to appear. Somewhere out there, Malik was alive. Or maybe, he had never really left that place at all. The forest fell silent once again. And at the edge of the trees, just barely visible in the darkness, a shadow stood watching. Its face burned. Its eyes hollow. And in its hand, the silver locket gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Malik disappears inside the haunted remains of the shelter, and the shadow reclaims the locket, signaling the past isn't finished yet. The world after the fire felt unreal, like a dream slipping into nightmare. The ruins of the old shelter were quiet again, coated in gray dust and ghostly smoke that rose without a source. Detective Harper stood there long after the others had left, watching the stillness, her body trembling from exhaustion and disbelief. Malik was gone. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, the flames, the girl in the red ribbon, the whisper. "Find us before he does." Every detail gnawed at her sanity. The forest was supposed to be lifeless, but every breath she took carried the faint sound of laughter, children's laughter, echoing faintly through the trees. Back at headquarters, Harper pored through the shelter's old records. The building had burned down 8 years ago, but the files told a darker story. The man who ran it, Raymond Keller, had a history no one knew. He'd been reported multiple times for child abuse and disappearance suspicions, yet every case had been dismissed. Each time, the reports vanished, erased from the system by someone higher up. And one note stood out. Subject 13, Behavioral Study Incomplete. There were no names listed, but the attached photo was unmistakable. A little boy with wide, dark eyes and a faint scar on his left wrist, Malik. Harper's heart sank. Malik hadn't just survived the shelter. He'd been part of an experiment. According to the report, Keller had been working under a private foundation obsessed with testing the resilience of fear. They had used the children to simulate trauma, forcing them into panic situations to study the emotional endurance of neglected youth. When the project was exposed, Keller vanished. The fire that destroyed the building was no accident, it was a cover-up. Harper leaned back in her chair, the words spinning through her mind. Malik had escaped something unimaginable, but what had followed him out of that building wasn't human anymore. That night, the forest came alive again. 2 hikers passing near the burned hollow reported strange lights flickering between the trees, not flashlights, but firelight. They heard voices, soft and childlike, calling names that didn't belong to them. And then they saw him, a small figure standing on the trail, barefoot, holding something metallic that caught the moonlight. When they shouted to ask if he was lost, the boy looked up. His eyes glowed faintly red in the darkness. The hikers fled. By the time police arrived, there was no sign of the boy, only a circle of ash where he had stood, and a child's footprint, burned into the dirt. Harper was the first to arrive at the scene. The sight froze her blood. The print was small, identical to Malik's. And next to it, burned into the soil, was a symbol, a spiral made of overlapping lines, the same design that had been carved onto the old shelter's front door years ago. This wasn't random. Malik wasn't lost. He was being called back. Harper ordered a deeper investigation into the area. The team used drones equipped with infrared cameras to scan the forest, but every feed malfunctioned the moment they approached the shelter site. Static. Glitching. Until one frame briefly flickered through, showing something that shouldn't have been there. A crowd. Children. Standing around the ruins, hand in hand, staring upward as if waiting for something. And at the center of the group, Malik. When Harper paused the frame, she noticed something even more horrifying. The man with the burned hand stood behind Malik, his palms resting gently on the boy's shoulders. The caption timestamp showed the footage was taken only minutes earlier. The team returned to the site immediately. The forest was thick with fog again, so dense it blurred the flashlights into halos. The air smelled of smoke and rain, as if the storm itself was on fire. They reached the clearing, and everything was quiet. No children. No movement. Only a faint orange glow seeping through cracks in the ground. Harper knelt, brushing away ash, and found something underneath. Wood. Charred but not old. Freshly burned. She ordered the team to start digging. Within minutes they uncovered a staircase leading underground, narrow, blackened, and reeking of rot. No one wanted to go first. Harper took the lead. Step by step, they descended into the earth. The deeper they went, the hotter it became, until sweat ran down their faces and the air grew thick with soot. The tunnel opened into a long hallway lined with broken doors. Behind each one, faint scratching sounds echoed, like fingernails dragging across wood. A flicker of firelight danced at the end of the corridor. Harper moved closer, her flashlight shaking in her hand. And then she saw them. Children, dozens of them, sitting silently on the floor, eyes closed, their faces covered in ash. They didn't move, didn't speak. Their skin was cold gray, their hair burned at the ends. Malik stood among them, his head lowered. When Harper called his name, he slowly lifted his face. His eyes were empty, no tears, no life. He looked at her as if he didn't recognize her anymore. He said it never stops burning, Malik whispered. He keeps it alive down here. Harper's flashlight flickered. The flame at the end of the hall grew brighter, forming a shape, tall and human-like. The burned man stepped out from behind the fire. His clothes were torn, his face twisted and melted by scars, but his eyes gleamed with something unholy. "Welcome back," he said softly. "You brought her." The air rippled with heat. The walls began to groan. One by one, the children turned their heads toward Harper. Every pair of eyes opened at once, glowing faint orange, reflecting the fire that wasn't real but still burned. Harper stepped backward, reaching for her radio, but it was dead. The sound of fire roared now, deafening, as the burned man stepped closer. "She left us," he said, voice echoing unnaturally. "All of them did. But the fire remembers. It always remembers." Malik's face twisted in pain. "Stop," he whispered. "Please." The man reached down and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder again. "You were my first," he said. "My miracle. The fire chose you. You carry it." And suddenly the flames leapt from the walls, swirling into Malik's body. He screamed, a sound that tore through the underground like thunder. His eyes burned bright orange, his small hands gripping the air as the fire consumed him. The night had no stars that evening. Only the trembling rhythm of sirens far away, and the whisper of flames dying in silence. Detective Harper sat beside Malik's still body, her lungs heavy with ash, her hands trembling with the memory of fire that didn't burn like normal fire, it burned the soul. The forest behind her was gone. In its place, a black scar spread across the earth, circular and hollow, as if something ancient had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. The fire had stopped, but not because it was defeated. It had moved. Harper stared at Malik. His eyes had been open moments ago, glowing with that unnatural light, but now they were shut again, calm, peaceful, almost human. The locket on his chest still pulsed softly, one heartbeat at a time. Inside was the picture of his mother, untouched by flame. When the emergency units finally reached her, they found Harper sitting there, silent, holding the boy in her arms. She didn't speak a word as they carried them both to the ambulance. To everyone else, the story was clear: a tragic rescue, a lost child, a forest fire. But Harper knew that what she'd seen wasn't something the world would understand. The boy wasn't just a survivor. He was the fire's memory. Days passed. Malik's body was moved to a local hospital morgue for examination, but strange things began happening the night he arrived. The temperature in the morgue rose steadily, though the building's power was cut. The steel walls began to sweat from the heat. Security cameras caught static bursts, each lasting only seconds, and in one of them, a faint silhouette could be seen standing near Malik's table, bending over him like a father whispering to a child. By morning, his body was gone. The sheet that had covered him lay burned through the middle, edges black and brittle. There was no trace of his remains, only a child-sized mark of ash. The investigation concluded it as an accidental equipment fire. But Harper knew better. Something had come back. For weeks afterward, Harper kept seeing him, not fully, just glimpses. A reflection in a car window. A boy's shadow standing on a street corner. A flicker of light at the edge of her vision when she closed her eyes. She tried to move on, to bury the memories under paperwork and logic. But one evening, she received a small envelope at her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single photo, old, weathered, half-burned. It showed a group of children in front of the old shelter, all smiling except one, Malik. Behind them stood a man in a white coat, his hands on Malik's shoulders, the same burned man she'd seen in the tunnel. On the back of the photo, a single line was written in shaky handwriting. "He's looking for home." That night, Harper drove back to the forest. But there was no forest anymore. Only blackened soil and dead trees that looked like charred bones. And there, at the very center of the clearing, she saw a small figure sitting quietly in the ashes. It was Malik. He looked older somehow, though his face was still soft and childlike. The faintest glow flickered beneath his skin, like embers waiting for breath. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around him shimmered with warmth. The ground pulsed faintly, and Harper realized the spiral symbol, the same one burned into the soil before, had returned. It wasn't carved this time. It was growing. She stepped closer. The closer she got, the heavier the air became, pressing against her chest like invisible hands. Malik lifted his head slowly, his eyes opening to reveal the faint orange light once more. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He looked tired. In that moment, Harper understood. The fire wasn't a curse. It was a memory, the echo of all the pain, fear, and cries that went unheard in that shelter. The children's screams had never left, they had simply taken form. Malik had carried them because he was the last one alive to remember. The fire had burned through him, yes, but it had also protected him. It had chosen him as its voice. And now, it wanted to rest. Harper knelt down beside him, tears stinging her eyes. The ash beneath her knees was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. She whispered words she didn't even understand, a promise to end what should have ended long ago. Malik blinked once, and smiled. For the first time. A faint wind passed through the clearing, stirring the ashes. The spiral of fire beneath him glowed brighter, then began to dissolve into tiny sparks that lifted into the night sky, swirling upward like stars returning home. Malik's body shimmered with light, his edges dissolving like smoke. And then, he was gone. The clearing went still. No heat. No sound. Just cold air and peace. Harper sat there until dawn, watching the sunrise spread over the blackened forest, painting it gold. It was over. But deep down, she knew stories like this never really ended. Because fire, no matter how gentle, always leaves something behind. Months later, the world moved on. The forest was replanted, the investigation forgotten. Harper retired early, moved to a quiet seaside town, and tried to rebuild her life. But one evening, as she walked along the pier, she noticed something, a small child standing by the railing, staring out at the waves. He was barefoot, wearing a faded gray hoodie. And hanging from his neck was a small silver locket, glinting faintly in the setting sun. When Harper blinked, he was gone. Only a thin wisp of smoke drifted where he had stood, rising gently into the twilight sky. She smiled sadly, whispering to the wind, "Rest now, Malik. The fire's finally home." The waves crashed softly against the shore, and somewhere far in the distance, for just a heartbeat, a warm orange glow flickered across the horizon, like a final goodbye from the boy who once burned the darkness. A story of pain, courage, and the fire that remembers.